Do you know the story of the 12-year-old girl who trained in just a few years to become the greatest fly casting champion and beat everyone in the world? I'm going to show you the biggest casting and fly fishing mistakes to avoid this year to have more success on the water. But before I get into this number one mistake to avoid and to assure that you have more success casting and fishing on the water this year, I've got the top 10 list of episodes from the past year. These are the most listened to podcast episodes, and each one I have a top mistake to avoid. So this is going to be the top 10 mistakes to avoid for fly casting and fly fishing. Let's get into it. All right, we're going to start with number 10, the top mistake to avoid this year. This comes from Gilbert Rowley, episode 576 of the Wet Fly Swing podcast. And the top mistake that he noted was incorrect rod angle when landing fish. What he says to do instead is to try keeping the rod positioning upstream when you're fighting a fish that's downstream of you and keep the rod tip as low as possible. This reduces stress on the line and will assure that you have more success landing fish this year. Let's go to number 9. This one comes from Phil Rowley in the Littoral Zone podcast, episode 576. And he says, a common mistake is not following the wind direction and capitalizing on this. The wind directions, Phil is a still water expert. And about this mark, he talks about wind conditions and particularly the benefits of where wind will blow food in choppy water and turns up food and actually increases water temperatures. So you want to follow that part of the bay where the wind's blowing the food, and those places on the lake can be the best sections to emphasize on, and you can have more success. Remember that. Follow the wind. Phil Roy, Littoral Zone podcast. All right, number 8, Tim Rajeff, the master, another great fly casting. We got a bunch of fly casting tips today as we go here. So Tim's top mistake is ignoring your grip pressure when fly casting. How often do you think about that? Your grip pressure, right? You got your fly rod, you just think about casting it, but he talks about grip pressure. And he says a common mistake in fly fishing is maintaining a consistent grip pressure throughout the casting, right? So many anglers overlook the impact of varying the grip pressure depending on what you need for accuracy and control. And he also says by not experimenting with lighter or firmer grips, anglers may miss out on optimizing their cast in different fishing conditions. So it's essential. So check this one out if you want to hear more. That's episode 573, Wet Fly Swing podcast, and Tim goes deep on casting. The number 7 top mistake to avoid in fly fishing this year. This comes from episode 647, Bruce Richards, another fly casting line designer from Scientific Anglers. He says one of his top mistakes to avoid is ignoring the top leg of your fly casting loop. So think of the top leg, and when you think of the loop, that's when you come back, when you're casting your fly rod, you get your rod and you're coming back. It's that loop that's coming back like this and bending around to your rod, right? So you got your line is going here and that loop's coming back. He says, look at the top leg and that'll tell you what's going on. And if by looking this, you can just look back, right, when you're casting and take a look, and you can see if it should be straight on. And what Bruce says is this section of the loop provides crucial information about the path of your rod tip that it has taken. So for effective and accurate casting, always aim to achieve a straight top leg in your loop as it indicates proper rod tip path. Avoid this oversight. So there you go. So if you maintain it, and you can see it, if it's off a little bit, if it's curving, you're off. And episode 647, Bruce has this in his 6-step method. This is a famous six-step method you could check out, Bruce Richards. All right, the number 6 top mistake to avoid. This comes from episode 581 of our most listened to podcast episodes this year. And this is Al Burr, a master two-handed fly caster. And he says the mistake to avoid is using too much abrupt force application again on your fly cast. This is more two-handed, you're two-handed now. So instead of by abrupt force, he means not using the right force. And what he says is, instead use the power up method to gradually increase the force throughout the cast. This progressive buildup helps in managing the depth of the D loop and enhances the overall energy of the cast, leading to more controlled and effective results. So that goes for single and double hand cast, Roy. It's all about that timing, right? It's like the paintbrush analogy. Again, we've heard a lot of where the paintbrush, you come back, you start slow, faster, faster, stop, and then abrupt stop, stop, and then you come forward slow, slow, and then fast stop, right? Stop, and that's your fly cast. Love using the pin analogy for my rod. All right, let's go to number five. The top five mistake to avoid. This comes from Dec Hogan, episode 651 of the podcast. And he says the mistake is ignoring fish feedback. So he's talking about steelhead specifically here. And he says one common mistake in fly fishing for steelhead is failing to adjust your technique after a fish shows interest. And this is interesting because this is kind of counterintuitive. We've talked a lot about this. But he says when a steelhead plucks or touches the fly without committing, it's a clear signal that something about your presentation can be improved. Instead of continuing with the same speed and the swing path, make thoughtful adjustments either by slowing down the fly, speeding it up, or altering the path of the current. So again, another tip, it's not always about just putting that same cast, mixed up a little bit. Episode 6551, Dec Hogan, Master Dec Hogan. All right, we're getting there. Mistake number four, the top fly fishing mistake to avoid from our top episodes this year, episode 608, Topher Brown, talking about fly lines and Atlantic salmon fishing. His mistake is choosing a Skagit line when a Scandinavian line is going to give you more distance. It's going to allow you to reach more of the fish. So he mentions this part in the podcast where there's some fish that he can see working out in the middle of the river, in a big river. And with the Skagit, you can't really get out there as effectively as you can with the Scandinavian line. They're just balanced better for that longer. And he talks about shooting it up towards the tops of the trees when you're doing your spay cast. So if you're trying to cover that middle of the river, remember, don't just stick with the Skagit. There's some other lines you should have in your box and in your satchel that can help you do the trick. So that's episode 608, Topher Brown. The number three, again, we're going to stick on casting in here with Kaylin Lockard, episode 629. This is mistake number three. And he says his mistake is neglecting practice drills, especially the grass drill. So he talks about this grass drill in the podcast. It's awesome, which is crucial for mastering the fly cast. The drill involves casting on the ground to visualize the perfect loop before taking it to the air. So again, he talks about casting it on the side, right? You're on the ground, you can see it. You drop it, cast back, you drop it behind you, drop it forward, and you could see the loop back and forth. And he says avoiding such drills can lead to a lack of control and understanding of the fly line's dynamics. Same thing. So if you're not looking at your line, if you're not watching it, seeing what it's doing, just like Bruce said, it's key to see what that loop is doing. And this grass drill is a really effective thing that you should be doing. And again, if the pros are doing it, I think we can all benefit from doing the same drills. So take a look at that. That's episode 629. Caitlin has his top five casting tips there in episode 629. All right, the number two, we're getting close. Number two, this is episode 566, Jason Randall talking about dry fly fishing. His top mistake to avoid is poor positioning and casting angles in mixed currents. So again, poor positioning when you're getting ready to target these fish. He says the common mistake when fishing in mixed currents is neglecting the importance of casting angles and line management. Jason highlights the crucial need for selecting the optimal approach for the angle to maximize drift length and minimize drag. So drag is a killer and is a killer issue with dry flies. He says failing to consider how to position your casts in relation to currents can lead to shorter, less effective drifts and increased drag, which often results in fewer strikes and spooked fish. Sometimes it's essential to make the downstream presentation to extend your drift and enhance the fly's natural movement in the water. We've heard this a number of times. The downstream presentation, it's not always about upstream. Sometimes downstream is going to give you that better presentation. All right, episode 566. That's Dry Fly Fishing, Jason Randall. All right, and the top number one mistake to avoid this year, drum roll please. This comes from Chris Korich, episode 678. Chris Korich, this is a great one, and I think he's going to disrupt what a lot of people are saying out there. And if you haven't heard about this, again, going back to Maxime McCormick, how does a 12-year-old girl in just a few years become the great champion in fly casting? And it all goes back to the number one mistake here, which is not choosing the correct rod, of course. And it goes deeper. I'm going to share what I'm talking about here, but Chris Roy goes and talks about this episode. He kind of blows us away that the rods they are using are not rods from this year. They're not rods from, even this century, not even this century, right? These rods are from older, like the 1980s. So what they're using is really full action fly rods. So again, a full action fly rod is a rod that's going to bend instead of just bending. See, this is our rod. Instead of just bending in the tip, this is a tip flex, it's a full flex, like just like this pin. See how it's bending and the whole thing? So you want down here, you want to feel that line when you're casting it. You want to be able to feel it bending in your hand. And so what he's saying is that a lot of these fast action rods are too fast. I mean, maybe when you're a pro at a high level, maybe when there's a lot of wind, you need some of that. But for the most of us, especially if you're brand new, you want to feel that rod or feel that line, because if you don't feel it, you're not going to know when to set up. So that's the biggest tip. And Maxime McCormick shows that. There's been a number of champions. In fact, a lot of the champions know this little reminder. So again, the number one mistake to avoid this year is choosing the wrong action of rod, the wrong rod. So number one, remember that. So go into your shop if you go in there and ask them to get a full flex rod and look at the difference. You don't necessarily have to have a fiberglass rod, but that might be a good way to look at some of these newer rods and feel what that feels like. You want something full action. I'm also going to give you one bonus tip, and this episode has not come out yet, but one bonus tip is, and again, it goes back to casting, of course. We have so many today, so many casting tips today. The number one bonus tip here today is to get a yarn rod. If you haven't seen the yarn rod, this is Echo makes one of these. It's basically a short rod, longer than this, but it's basically the tip section of a two-piece rod, and it has a yarn on the end. And when you cast it, you can cast it indoors in just your house, your apartment, wherever. You can actually cast this thing. And the guest that we had on in an upcoming episode, who is a pro, fishes the Missouri, he does this 10 minutes every day, literally 10 minutes every single day. Actually, I think maybe it's 5 days a week, I think what he said, but he does this casting every day. And we talked about, he's like, hey, he's a pro, right? And that's what pros do. So if you want to get yourself up to that next level, if you want to kind of flatten that learning curve and get better at fly casting and fly fishing, of course, because think of it, when you're dry fly fishing, like Jason Randall talked about, and you got to hit that spot, and sometimes you do, maybe it is that little spot where you got to hit with that fly. Practice is the only way you're going to do it, and you're not going to do it on the water. That's where the struggle is, right? You got to do it when you're doing these practicing skills. So that's the biggest tip and takeaway today, is that practice, 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 and practice some more. You don't have to do it for hours a day. Even 10 minutes a day will do it. I would love to hear from you right now, and we'll take it from there. Appreciate you for listening, and we'll see you on the next one.